It doesn't really matter where it happened. It was just something super fun that happened that you want to tell your friend about. And you're super excited, and when you start telling them, you realize that you start to talk faster and louder and everything. And your friend, they have just been on their phone the whole time, and they just don't reply. And after a couple of seconds of silence, they realize, like, okay, I should probably say something. And they're like, oh, that's fun. Have you encountered this? Yeah, how did it feel? Not that good, right? So I spot a lot of different people here in the audience today. I see developers, talent acquisition specialists, the CTO, and we all work with very different things, right? We have a lot of different tasks in our day-to-day work. But we do have one thing in common, or maybe more, but at least one thing in common. And that is that we all need to listen in our work. So what would happen if you stopped listening? I know as a developer, if I stopped listening, I would totally build the wrong thing. I mean, the customers, they would be super confused because I didn't build what they expected, and the system doesn't work in a correct way. And I think that if our TA specialist stopped listening, it would be super hard to recruit someone, and they would probably end up in the wrong workplace. And as a business developer, if you stop listening, our clients would be furious. They would never get the help that they need. How many things have gone wrong just because you didn't listen to them? Or maybe someone didn't hear it. Or maybe they just got it in a distorted way, and it was a misunderstanding. Listening is paramount. So my name is Madeleine. I'm a software developer, Scrum Master, and interpersonal skills competence lead. And I'm also a podcaster, together with Sofia. And you could think that if you have a podcast, you only speak, right? But you actually have to listen a lot as well. I don't think it would be a very good podcast if I just talked and talked without listening to Sofia. And it wouldn't be fun for you to listen to it either. And I'm here today to teach you 5 things that you can do to become a better listener. But first, let's start with, why are we poor listeners? There's actually a good reason behind it. So basically the problem is caused that we talk much faster than, we think much faster than we talk. So the average rate of speech is around 125 words per minute. And that rate, that is slow for the human brain. Because our brain is like a supercomputer, better than any computer that we have, and it processes things like so fast. So our thoughts that we have, they race in our head much faster than 125 words per minute. And that means that when we listen, we receive words at an extremely slow pace compared to what the brain is actually capable of. So no wonder that we sometimes start thinking about something else and planning our grocery list or plan what we are going to do tomorrow. Because our brain just wants to process things. So listening, it is hard. It is. So let's just get right on to what we are going to do to become a good listener. First of all, listen with the same passion as you want to be listened to. And that means that you should not get tempted in doing something else. And no multitasking is allowed. Do you think that multitasking works? I don't know if you ever tried listening to a podcast, for example, at the same time as you write something, and then you suddenly start writing what they say. The brain it doesn't have the capability to do 2 cognitively challenging tasks at the same time. So you can't really write a text message and expect to hear what the person is telling you. So that means that when someone is speaking to you, you put away your phone, turn off the TV, close your laptop, and just show the person that you care enough about them to focus entirely on them and the conversation. Research actually shows that the mere presence of a smartphone or a phone affects you. Even if it's just sitting to you, like next to you on the table, you don't have to use it, but it just being there affects you. So in a study from 2014 called the iPhone effect, researchers paired up 200 participants and put them together in a coffee shop. And they were instructed to talk to each other for about 10 minutes. They could talk about anything. They just were instructed to sit and talk to each other. And they had research assistants observing them from a distance. And the assistants, they were looking for signs of like, did they use the smartphone? Did they touch the smartphone, or did they put it on the table? So after the 10 minutes had passed, the participants got a survey that they could answer. And that survey was formed to measure things like connection and how did the conversation feel. Did you feel connected? Did you feel empathy towards the person? So what did the results say? They said that if one of the participants, or both, if any of the participants had a smartphone or used it, or even just put it on the table next to them, the conversation was rated to be much lower in connection. It was less fulfilling, and it just wasn't a good conversation at all. So the next time you have an important conversation coming up, you might want to reconsider bringing your phone. And if you have to bring it, just don't use it. So the second point, be present. So be mindful of your inner dialogue. Even though the brain is fast, as I said, it's super fast, try not to jump to conclusions or trying to figure out what you're going to say next. I know I do this sometimes. I imagine the whole conversation in my head, and like, if they say this, I'm going to say that, and like, you have the whole thing panned out, and then they say something completely different, and it's like, oh, why did I even do this? So really listen to what the person says. But listening is not only about what you hear. You also have trembling hands, or raised eyebrows, or a trembling voice maybe, because our body communicates in so many different ways and on so many levels. And you need to hear and see those too. So you can find out what they're not saying implies something as well. And listening is not only a passive endeavor, it's active. So that means that you should also be active, and your body language matters too. So you should try to, look at them when they speak, keep eye contact, face the person. Maybe you nod sometime just to make them realize that you're following the conversation and that you're not thinking about something else. It is a common misunderstanding that you should just be silent when someone speaks. And I don't know if you ever talk to someone who just sits there without saying anything or not even showing anything. It is kind of awkward. So you have to use like short comments or short replies just to show them that you are following the conversation. So affirm them without like interrupting them. It could sound like, really? Or maybe, yeah, I'd be mad too. Or no way, did it really happen? Or maybe, I don't know, congratulations, that must feel awesome. And lastly, match their energy. So if a person is really happy to share something with you, you should reply by smiling and sounding excited when they talk to you. Share the thrill with them. And if someone is sad, maybe you should use a more softer voice and speak in a more compassionate way. And all of these things, they usually come pretty natural for us. We do it without thinking about it, but it is easy to forget if we are distracted or if we are stressed. So it might be a good idea to think about it a little bit extra. We have number 3. Don't be a conversation killer. So you know when you tell someone a story, let's say that you're going to tell them about the first time you went skiing. I went skiing for the first time a couple of weeks ago, so it comes easy for me to tell this. So maybe you tell them about how you just went up the ski lift for the first time, and then you felt so nervous when you were going down, and yeah, you had the children next to you because it's the child's hill, but you were still feeling good for doing it, and you tell the whole story. And your friend is like, oh yeah, I also went skiing last week. I went to Aspen, and it was sunny every day, and I had beer and after ski, and it was so much fun. And yeah, I really feel like an expert. It's not that fun to share a story with someone like that. The person who always tries to surpass your story. Let's call it the boaster. You know, they always have to be better than you. Or worse, for that matter. Maybe you tell them about when you sprained your ankle, and they were like, oh, well, you know what happened to me? I broke my leg, and the emergency helicopter had to fetch me at the top of the hill. And it's like, what am I even going to reply to this? We also have the judge. And this is not about judging the person, but they judge what you say and put a label on it. So maybe you tell them about, I don't know, maybe you lost your job, and you tell them about it. And without you even finishing it and telling them how you feel, they immediately have to label it like, oh, that's so bad, I'm so sorry for you. But maybe it wasn't bad for you. Maybe you losing your job enabled you to start your own company and do something you always wanted to do. So you get kind of thrown off when someone tries to label your story into something good or bad. And speaking of stories, we have the storyteller. You know, the one who always has to have another story that's like, when you tell something, they realize, oh, I also have to tell you this. And there's a time and place for everything. Of course, they will be able to share it sometime, but maybe not when you are trying to do it. And they barely let you finish before they even tell it. It's similar to the one that's called the controller, someone who tries to steer the conversation into what they want to talk about. That's not good also when you try to listen. And then we have my favorite, probably because I'm guilty of doing this. It's the fixer. The person always tries to find a solution to the problem. And sometimes you don't even want a solution to the problem. Sometimes you just want someone who listens to you and validates you and saying like, oh, I understand, that must be hard. And I mean, it comes very natural for us as developers and working with IT. We solve problems on a daily basis, right? So of course we don't mean anything bad when we try to come with a solution. But it's not good if you're supposed to be a good listener. So what you can do to avoid this is to start, when someone tells you something, start by asking like, do you want comfort or do you want a solution? Because then you know how you should reply to them. I think that's especially effective in like close relationships with friends or a spouse maybe, when they come home and tell about something that happened at work. Sometimes they want a solution, but most of the time they just want someone that you can just talk to. All right, number 4. So empathy, or number 4 is be empathic and validate. Empathy is the foundation of genuine connection. And empathy is the ability to understand someone and understand their feelings. If you compare it to sympathy, it's quite different, because sympathy is you wanting someone to feel better. Like something happened and you wish that they had it better. But Empathy, on the other hand, is putting yourself in their shoes and feeling what they are feeling. So instead of feeling for someone, you feel with them. And empathy doesn't come naturally for all of us. For some people it's easy, and for some people it's not. But there are some steps you can use to help develop it. First of all, you can ask yourself questions. So start by asking yourself, like, what's the person's background? What have they been through before that might affect this? Do they have any past traumas that affects how they behave towards you? You can ask yourself, what would happen if someone did this to me? How would I feel? Because it makes it easier for you to put yourself in their shoes. Next, you can look at them. And now I don't mean just look, I mean look on a deeper level. Try to really see them and try to realize that they are persons also with feelings and hopes and concerns and joy. And they might be facing much harder things than you know. You could also imagine them as a child, which sounds a bit silly, but it's a good thing. Just try to think of them like a 4-year-old, because many of us feel that it's much easier to feel sympathy or empathy towards a child because children are innocent and they are helpless in a sort of way. We have so much stigma around feelings when you're adults, and you try to be in a certain way and you try not to show your emotions too much. But we feel empathy for children much easier. So picture them as children. You should also learn to identify your own emotions. Because in order to feel empathy for someone else, you have to know how they feel. And to know how they feel, it's a good start to know how you feel yourself. Because if you can identify emotions in yourself, you can much easier identify emotions in others. So how are you feeling right now? Anyone?
Good.
Good, that's not an emotion. Most of us immediately say it, but it's not. How are you feeling?
I feel admiration.
Oh, that's sweet. But most of us are used to saying good or fine, but they are not emotions. So it's a good idea to start thinking. So maybe you feel admiration. I hope all of you do, but I don't think you do, maybe. But maybe you feel interested or curious or something, or at least I hope you do. Or maybe you just feel content. That's also an emotion. And lastly, you should not judge your own emotions. And this one is also super hard, because most of us do all the time. And we try to avoid it or resist it, and we act on it in different ways. But the next time an emotion arises in you, try to just sit back and just accept it. Like, okay, I am feeling frustrated right now, and that's okay. Because the more you practice accepting your own emotions, the easier it will be to feel empathy towards others. So what does all this have to do with listening, you might ask? Well, we need to be more than just a listening ear. We need to make people feel heard and to feel understood. So good listeners, they do more than just sit there and listen. They validate. And validation is the act of affirming the validity of a person's emotion. So it's basically saying, like, I get what you're feeling, and I hear you, and it's okay to feel that way. So validation, it consists of identifying a specific emotion in a person, and then you offer justification for feeling it. So one example could sound like, she really told you that? Wow, yeah, I would be so frustrated too. So you identify the emotion, the person's feeling frustrated, and you say that I would also be, you justify it. What you should not do is to provide invalidating responses, like, you'll be fine, or it could be worse. And I think it's easy to say this because you think that, like, it could be worse. And you might be right. I mean, the person who told you something, they might not even have a reason to worry, and you know that. But they are worried, regardless if they shouldn't be. So they just want someone to acknowledge that, and that should be you. So instead of saying like, don't worry about that bug, you will solve it soon, try saying like, whoa, yeah, I totally get that, that you're frustrated about this bug. It seems like a really tough one to crack. You hear the difference? And validation is equally important for positive emotions as well. So a study made in 2004 showed that in romantic relationships, they were higher in commitment and intimacy and trust, and also lower in daily conflict when you validated each other's good fortune. And most of us who are in relationships thinks that of course I validate their good fortune. Who would not do that? But it's also easy to just answer in a like passive, constructive way, like, oh, that's great. You're not super excited or anything, you're just like, oh, good for you. But this study in 2004 also showed that if you answer in this kind of passive, constructive way, it correlates with the same level of negative relationship outcomes. So you end up breaking up in the end, just as much as actually destructive comments do. So that means that if your partner is super excited and tells you something and you answer with a lack of interest, or you just, oh, great, good for you, that can be just as harmful for the relationship as saying something actually mean to them. And I don't think most of us think about it, but it can be quite hurtful. We have number 5. Be curious. So you are all the detectives in the conversation. So you gather information and you try to discover more about the person you talk to all the time. One thing you can do to do this is to ask powerful questions. And they can sound like, tell me more, or I'm curious about, or can you elaborate? Can you help me understand? Or maybe how might we do this? So these kind of open questions that lets them talk more. And of course you should also ask follow-up questions that's related to the conversation. So if they tell you something about their skiing trip, you can ask, okay, where did you go and how did it feel and stuff like that. So if you've ever been to a dinner and you're placed next to someone that you don't know, and you come home in the evening and you feel like, wow, we had such a good conversation, and he or she was so good at talking, and wow, what a great time I had. Most of the time when this happens, the person actually didn't talk that much, but they asked you questions, so got you to talk. And when you get to talk, you feel that, oh, this conversation is great. So that's a good tip if you want to have good conversations with people, especially if you are like me, who isn't the most talkative person. Asking questions is a good way of keep the conversation going. If you do find it hard to be curious, just sit back and try to think to yourself, like you can use this following mindsets or mantras, if you want to call them that. So you can think like, this person is worth listening to. You can think, I don't know how this conversation is going to unfold, but I want to connect to this person. I will listen for who they are. I will be curious of what they say. And I will try to see their perspectives, feelings, actions, and desires. So by thinking this, it can help you get into the mindset of being curious about them. So interest is an essential part of listening. You have to be interested in the person you're talking to. Otherwise, the conversation will be super boring. But unfortunately, many of us feel that, maybe especially in close relationships and important relationships, we feel that our interest maybe declines a bit because we've known them for so long. And we feel that I already know everything about my friend or my partner. Especially if you live together and talk all the time, it's maybe hard to find that interest and that spark you once had. But try to really be curious and try to listen to what you hear. Instead of thinking like, oh no, not this story again. Try to think like, okay, how can I hear this differently? How can I pick up new information? And maybe you can even make progress and learn something new. And besides, if someone is telling the same thing over and over again, they probably felt that they weren't heard. So it might be a good idea to actually listen good. So don't stop being curious.
I really want to hear more about that.
Exactly. So why am I telling you all this? It's simply because I believe that any relationship can be improved if you become a better listener. So you can become a better coworker, a better friend, a better partner, or a better, I don't know, sister. And if you don't believe me, just take 1 week, and try to apply these things that I've told you about and see if it makes a difference in your relationships. I think they will. So what you are going to do is listen with the same passion you want to be listened to. You should be present. You should watch out for conversation killers. You should be empathic and validate. And you should be curious. And remember also one thing. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, which means that we should listen twice as much as we talk. Thank you for listening. Any questions? There's a mic coming for you.
Hi, where did you ski?
I skied at Vallåsen, just north of Skåne.
Hello.
Hello.
Have you applied these techniques in your close relationships? And if you have, how have they improved?
Yes, I have applied them in close relationships. I used to be a person who found it really hard to talk about things in my relationships, like talking about how I feel and everything. And I really tried improving that. And I realized that you have to listen a lot to be able to do this. And especially if you are with someone who isn't that good at communicating either, it's a really good idea to really apply this, especially being curious and asking and try to empathize with them and realize that, okay, there is probably something behind the way they are acting. Can I be curious and find out what it is and try to improve it in that way? And it's a struggle, of course. Sometimes I listen to my partner and he's telling me something that I'm completely uninterested in. It happens to all of us, I think. But I have to think about the relationship itself, and if I were him, like, would I want him to look at his phone or zoom out or something? No, of course I wouldn't. So I really, really, really try to be a good partner in that way. But the thing is that once you try to start thinking about it, you become so aware of it also. A bit strange when you think about like, okay, I really have to listen now. Did you have a question? Yeah? Where did the mic go? Here. It's for the stream, so that everyone hears.
A small question, but do you have any advice how to apply these techniques if a person you are talking to is not a good listener? Or like, can you help a person, or maybe there are some ways to improve?
That's a really good question, actually. Of course, if you talk to someone who like is a boaster or tries to steer the conversation, I think the best thing you can do is to actually say that, okay, I wasn't finished. I want to continue talking about this. Because it's actually good to be clear in these kinds of situations. The person is probably not doing it on purpose, at least I hope so, and maybe they aren't even aware of it. So if you can try to point it out without being a douche, like now you're just bragging, but try to like steer it back, and maybe at a later point in time, you can actually use it as feedback. Like Martin said, feedback is a gift. So it's actually really good for them to find out that maybe you do, I don't know, steer the conversation into another topic, and it might be good to not do that.
Also send your friend the YouTube link to Madde's talk.
Yeah. Oh. Oh, poor ones who are listening.
Okay. We've been with 2 years of pandemic, and there's been a lot of change in our work. You know? We communicate much more through Slack channels and networking and chatting. How would you describe this, or would you give a tip or anything in how to become a better listener through these kinds of channels instead?
I think the same applies, regardless if it's written communication or spoken. It's much difficult, of course, when you're online, because you can't really see body language in the same way. Even if you have your webcam on, you don't have eye contact with a person, and usually you see like this part of them, so you don't know what to do with the rest of the body. So those parts are harder, but you can still, like, if it's a video call, for example, you can hear their tone of voice, and you can interpret that, but listening is still the same. If it's a written communication, I think you also can apply the same things, like don't try to steer the conversation, still be curious and still ask questions and everything.
Thank you.
Yes, so we had one more question from Patrik Ekdal, who's wondering, do you have a good way of remembering people's names?
No. I'm much better at remembering faces. It's funny because I remember when I was in like middle school, I used to look into the like photo catalog of people and like remembering all the names. And I'm really good at remembering that, but I'm really bad at remembering names when I meet people like this because I'm so focused on making a good impression and everything. I remember in, I think it was last semester in the interpersonal skills competence group, we talked about this, and we talked about like getting a little book where you write down things about the person, like not immediately when you meet them, that would be weird, but afterwards, like just write a little, like, okay, this was Christian, and his interest is blah, 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 because then you can remember it the next time, and you can come back with like, oh, so how did your sourdough bread baking go? So that's one thing, but just to remember names like this in a conference, no, I don't have any good tips. Does any one of you have, maybe?
Repeat the name.
Sorry?
If someone tells you the name, you say, oh, hi, Mother.
that's a good one, to repeat the name. So yeah, if you didn't hear in the stream, so you say like, okay, hi, Linus, nice to meet you. Good one.
Any other questions? No? All right, then let's give Madde a round of applause.